Okay, so welcome to week 4 of the CRC Academy, working as a CRC. I am filling in for Monica Quativa today, and like I said, I would follow along on your slides because some of them we're going to get into the IRB questionnaire forms, and some of them are going to be hard to see on my screen here, but we'll talk about some of the more important aspects of being a coordinator. And so far, I really believe coordinators are the most AI proof position in the industry. I think maybe even more than a PI. The coordinator is physically working with patients the majority of the time, as well as doing a lot of these things that can be automated. Some of these things can be automated. But what can't are the patient interactions, specifically in the office patient interactions. And we're going to get into some of that here. But we want to get into IRB, and we're going to get into like the initial submission IRB form, and then the continuing review, and then closeout. And basically this is the 3 steps you will take when you're a coordinator as far as dealing with your IRB. So I do think these things here will be or could be automated at some point. There's already some companies doing automatic IRB approvals, automatic IRB form filling out. These do get repetitive, but for the time being, most of the stuff is still done by people. I would say 99% of sites. And now that might change to some degree with the IRB component. But what is the initial IRB submission? So when your site gets selected for a study, your site is given a startup regulatory packet, which we discussed in the last week, and we'll probably discuss more in the upcoming weeks. But one of the things for the regulatory packet is to get IRB approval and IRB submission. Now, most sites utilize central IRB. This is an IRB that the sponsor appoints, that every site will use, that is not under the regulatory oversight of a local IRB. So if your site is part of a local IRB, you will not use a central IRB, but most private sites are able to use central IRBs. And then this is what you're going to do. And we're going to actually look at one of the central IRB groups, Copernicus group. But if you have a local IRB, chances are you'll be doing something similar. It's just the form might look a little different because it's a little bit more of a process to go through the local IRB than the central IRBs. So this is usually all done online on the IRB portal, and they all basically look the same. The logos are obviously different, maybe the order of some of the questions are different, but ultimately it's pretty self-explanatory. You put the protocol title, your site number, sometimes you may not know what that is, whether your research is federally funded or not. Most sites do not federally funded trials. Who your PI is, what their full name and credentials, what their email, their medical license, the expiration date, and the state. So see, all this stuff could be automated. And there are companies working on doing this for the coordinators, but ultimately it's still important that you know how to do it, even if we do end up using AI to automate some of these tasks. It's important. I was just talking to my lead CRC today at the site. It's important to understand how these things work, because it's one thing to delegate something to an AI, but to make sure that the AI knows what they're doing and doing it properly, it takes knowing how to do this. So it's good that you are in this course, taking this course, and that you're able to understand what this entails. So most of it's automated. The PI will have to, I believe, log in and sign at the end of both the initial as well as the closeout, and then the ongoing maintenance. But let's continue through the initial IRB questionnaire. So mailing address, research site name, and address where the subjects will be seen. And they're asking you for these things because this is how they populate the informed consent form. And so most of the stuff is self-explanatory. Now, they do get into some questions that require a little more thought, and we're going to get into those right now. Will there be any additional research sites where subjects will be seen? So this is where, if you have a satellite location, you'll need to fill out an additional site form, and then this blue hyperlink is actually where you would fill out the new additional location. And if you'll be conducting this study at multiple sites, have the facilities been granted by the permission by the sponsor? Now, here's something that's absolutely mandatory. Your site should have a daytime phone number and a 24-hour phone number. And they will check, sponsors and IRB sometimes will check if these are working numbers. Now, they can be the same number, but the 24-hour one should have an answering service. My site, we outsource it to a call center, and they're instructed to take a message and let us know if anyone called overnight. I've been running my site now for almost 4 years and no one's called it. You have to have a 24-hour number. If you don't, you should get one. There's a couple of groups that do this. It's pretty easy to find. Subject compensation. So this is the section where you're going to have to work in coordination with your contracts and budgets department to figure out how much patients are going to get paid. Will they be getting paid per visit? Will they be getting paid at the end of the study, which is kind of frowned upon? We always pay patients per visit, and it's usually anywhere from $75 to $200 depending on what's involved for that particular visit. So you want to know the exact number because this will be on the informed consent. The next questions are about the informed consent as well. Do you wish to submit site-specific wording other than the PI's name and address? We always put no. And then, does this study have additional sub-study informed consents? You have to check with the sponsor. Are there sub-studies? They used to do a lot of genetic sample studies. Now they might do optional photography studies or optional sub-studies for additional endpoints. You're just going to need to find out from the sponsor. If you're not sure, ask the monitor or ask the clinical trial manager. And it's the IRB, the central IRB takes care of all the wording. So when it comes to generating an informed consent form for your site, if you're using a central IRB, this is the information they want so that they can generate the form for you. Then they'll send you the draft to make sure it looks good, and then you'll approve it, and then you'll have an actual approved with an IRB stamped informed consent form. Next time the protocol is amended, that would require a informed consent form to be amended, the site will get one automatically. This next question is, will a translated version of the subject information and consent form be needed to facilitate the understanding of the study? We always put yes for Spanish because my site is located in a highly concentrated Hispanic population, so we always put yes. You may not always get them at the same time as you get the English ones, but if you need other translations, you can ask for translations. Then they ask if the site's ever been audited, either by the FDA, the Office of Human Research Protection, or another regulatory agency in the past 5 years. Now, this does not mean a sponsor audit. It just means a regulatory agency. So it's either yes or no, and then if yes, was a Form 483 or other list of observations issued? Hopefully it's a no. If it's a yes, you got to list the date. And if it's a yes, you got to provide a copy and the response letter, which you will learn all about going forward in the study. They also ask if the PI is able to do research, if they've ever been disbarred, if they've ever been suspended, if they ever had a warning letter. And then they also ask about the PI if they've ever been limited or placed on probation for either medical licensure or doing research. So hopefully this is no. This is one of the things I look at when I look to hire new investigators for my site. One of the first things I do is look for disciplinary actions on their state, for their state board. Now, training and qualifications of the PIs. Are you and your research staff knowledgeable of GCP? This is why we have everyone do GCP. Ideally, you do GCP before you even start working in research. But then they ask, what training have you done? And they have a list of trainings. I recommend the NIH Human Participation Protections. I think it's a $30 course, but it's pretty simple. ACRP offers some. City offers some. If you need help with any of these links, just let me know. And then they ask about the PI's experience. How long have they been conducting research? How many studies have they been conducting as a PI and as a sub-I? And then you can click see CV for complete list. Then they get into coordinator workload. How many studies per coordinator? What is the average number of subject visits a day? Of the active studies, how many are currently enrolling? And remember, this is not for the site. This is just for the PI. Next questions are, state the number of key study staff that will assist. So how many sub-Is? Of those, how many are MDs? How many coordinators? How many pharmacists? There could be overlap. At my site, the coordinator are the pharmacists. So there's overlap there. And then they ask, how would you generally describe your research setting? Rural, suburban, urban, or other? Same thing with the setting of the study site. Is it a hospital? Is it a research clinic? Is it a private practice? What are the community attitudes towards the conduct of research in your local community? And we always put neutral, unless I know for sure it's positive or negative, which with negative you'd have to explain. Hopefully there's not negative sentiment in your community. I always put neutral because almost no one knows about research and almost no one has an opinion one way or another, and I find that most communities are similar in that regard. Are you aware of any state or local laws where you intend to conduct research would impose stricter additional requirements in addition to those imposed by federal regulations? So in California, you have the California Bill of Rights. So you can put that one and just put on other. What is the distance between the nearest hospital and the research site? And then describe the emergency equipment available. And this is a checklist. Crash cart, we always check. Emergency meds, we always check. CPR staff and dial 911, we always check. And if you have something else, you can put other and put that. Describe additional resources unrelated to emergency care. So do you have interpreters? Do you have counseling services? Do you have bilingual staff members? Others? This is your chance to shine. Remember, IRBs really only care about one thing, and that's patient safety. Everything else is secondary to our patients being safe, and is this research done in an ethical manner? That's really it. So put yourself in their perspective. This is what they want. Study conduct and subject information consent form process. They ask how will the subjects be recruited, and you can check if it's existing patients or your database or referrals or advertisement. And then you get into demographics. So percentage of Asian, percentage of American Indian, percentage of Native Hawaiian, percentage of white, percentage black, percentage Hispanic. You can make estimations. If you have tools like Creo or Patient Ace, you can probably get more accurate information, or maybe your PI's electronic medical records. Do you anticipate to recruit subjects from vulnerable populations? So vulnerable populations are children, adults with diminished decision-making capacity, economically disadvantaged or unemployed, so educationally disadvantaged, visually impaired or illiterate, limited English skills, or non-US citizens, employees, colleagues, students of the PI, pregnant women. So we never put any of these. You can argue that almost any community is going to have economically disadvantaged people, but compensation is reasonable in order to eliminate possibility of undue influence. So any community is going to have economically disadvantaged, unemployed. Obviously, if it's a pediatric study, you're going to have to check yes for children. Or if it's a study, for example, with adults with learning disabilities, you're going to have to put diminished decision-making capacity because that's the nature of the study. So it's not automatically everything no. Also, English not being the primary language, you want to have translated informed consent form. The IRB, the good news is the central IRB is going to do all that for you. You just got to let them know. Then it gets into legally authorized representatives or guardians. And the next sections are pretty self-explanatory. It basically walks you through the process of consent. So if you remember the process of consent, it's you let the patients know that research is voluntary, that research is not treatment, that this is research and not medical care, even though they're getting excellent medical supervision. It's technically not treatment or care. Also, they're given an adequate time to review and consider the consent form and even discuss it with their family or loved ones before they make a decision. You will maintain confidentiality of patient privacy at all times and respect HIPAA, and that the patients will be consented in a private room and have plenty of time to ask for questions, and that the information collected will be limited to what's required by research, and that the study-related assessments are also conducted in a private area. And so that's basically the process of consent. And GCP, that's the initial IRB review form. You will do something similar to this every year for your studies. You don't want to it's called continuing review for IRB. You don't want to let your IRB status expire, because that's a very bad deviation. It means you're doing a study without IRB approval. It could easily happen if you overlook it and ignore emails. But the monitor should be reminding you, the IRB should be reminding you. At my site, we put alerts in Creo to remind the coordinators. Ultimately, AI is going to do this stuff, but for the time being, and again, it's important to know the process because we are still early in the process. Continuing review is basically the same. It just, instead of asking so much about who you're recruiting, it's asking how many you've screened so far since the last review or since the beginning of the study. How many have completed the study? How many withdrew? And please provide an explanation for each subject's withdrawal. And you can attach separate sheets if necessary. Have any non-English speaking subjects been enrolled in the study? If yes, you want to put the informed consent form in their language and they want to see an example. Have there been any unanticipated problems involving risks to research subjects? Some examples might be safety report that is serious and unexpected and related, or significant protocol deviations that affect the rights and welfare of the subject. So I've had a site that actually has been audited by an IRB, and let me tell you the circumstances of that audit. So we kept having the same deviation occur at our site over and over, and I can't even remember what this deviation was. It was not an out of window deviation, but it was something where the monitor never caught it until the end. And so basically all of our patients, we had the same deviation, and it technically was a safety deviation. So obviously we had to submit for every patient the deviation form, and the fact that we retrained our staff when we knew about it, and we actually had a corrective action, preventative action plan. So we sent all this to the IRB, and the IRB audited us because it was the amount of deviations and the same deviations definitely was an outlier compared to other sites. So the IRB sent over someone from the IRB, and they were actually, it turns out they were a volunteer board member. And I got into a conversation with this gentleman. He was a pastor for a church in his community. He was not part of our community, but he traveled to our site. And he requested every study that was under that IRB that he should audit. So that's the thing with these IRB audits. If you get an IRB audit, there's only like 3 IRBs, really. 3 major central IRBs. So if you get an IRB audit, they're allowed to audit all the studies that are theirs at your site. So he spent half a day there. I explained what the issue was, but then he looked at all of our processes, and ultimately his audit went really well, and there were no findings other than what we already knew and the reason why they were there. But it was good. It was good documentation on their part. And every now and then, if you're doing this long enough, you're going to get an audit, whether it's a sponsor, an IRB, or an FDA audit. So just get used to it. At some point, it's going to happen. Continuing with this review form, remember the continuing review form. Has an FDA inspection occurred since the start of the study? Has any changes in qualifications to your PI? Has your medical license been reviewed or renewed? Any new findings that may affect the risk-benefit ratio of the study? And has the protocol been amended? These are the questions that they ask. Now, the closeout report is the last thing that you'll be doing as a site when it comes to IRB reports. You'll be doing other things with IRBs too. You'll be submitting deviations to the IRBs, and you'll be submitting serious adverse events to the IRBs in addition to these reports. So, closeout report is not to be done until told to do so by the CRA. Can sometimes be done prior to closeout, and usually done after the CRA closeout visit, and then the report is sent to the sponsor as well. So it's a similar form. It's no different than the other ones. It's just the reverse, kind of how many patients completed, how many patients decided to withdraw, how many patients are lost to follow-up, how many screen fails were there, have you had any complaints from subjects, is there any information required reporting per the IRB that you didn't yet? So again, these are deviations that affect patient safety, and these are serious adverse events. And have you implemented any change to the protocol that this IRB has not yet approved? This is kind of your last chance to get your documentation, your regulatory in order. Finally, the PI, just like the initial, the continuing, and the closeout, needs to sign off on these things. IRB submission, there's 3 of them: initial, continuing, and closeout. They're done on the IRB website. Those who have access for the site, usually the coordinator and the PI, will receive email notification of approval, or more likely, they're going to ask you queries. Can you explain this further? Can you upload this document? Can you give more clarity on this particular piece of information? And usually the site will download the continuing review or initial review or closeout review and then file it in your rec binder. So that's basically it in a nutshell, what a coordinator does in regards to IRBs. Thank you very much.